St. Thomas's silver coins in India. As we know, St. Thomas was one of the disciples of Jesus Christ. He was the doubting Thomas. And this is written by Paula Gruber and her search for these coins. Towards the end of the Second World War, she said, my father, Johann Gruber, a German scholar teacher, was hiding in Portugal. He was working under the assumed name along with a well-known spy named Joan Pujol Garcia, translating German communication for the Allies. During his years in Lisbon, he heard rumors of the survival and existence of some coins from the infamous biblical 30 pieces of silver that Judas Iscariot allegedly received in exchange for the arrest of Jesus, as is narrated in the Bible. Though a little girl then, I would remember the rumor my father spoke of for many years, and particularly the reference to a place called Malabar and Goa on the west coast of India. It was a favorite topic of conversation for some time for our devoted Catholic family. And later in my 30s, trailing the hippie culture, I headed for Goa along with a boyfriend, following a lead and a friend's advice. I landed a few weeks later at Kananora on the Malabar coast in Kerala. Through some contacts in the local Catholic parishes, I visited a village in Kannur called Cherukunu, where I was shown 4 silver coins by an old lady named Parukuti. Blood silver, Raktaveli. She referred to the coins as Raktaveli, or blood silver. The story of the 4 coins so astounded me that I found it too preposterous to believe, and wondered whether I had chased a wild goose all these years, but more surprises were to unfold in the years to come. A brief mention is made by some websites following my revealing this story to Justin, my English translator. However, here's my story of the mysterious relics called the St. Thomas coins, as never reported before. First reported in 2005. I first reported this story in 2005 in Germany, after traveling to Kerala, India, on 3 occasions. Since then, my friend Justin has posted a brief version of the story on some websites. It raised many controversies then, and I have for many years been both threatened and harassed by many Hindus as well as the Protestant church members from India. But the truth is the truth, and I cannot change it. In fact, for the record, this is the full story of the events that led me into publishing the discovery of those 4 coins the Hindus call the Raktaveli, narrated here in greater detail. Parukuti Amma shows St. Thomas silver coins. It was actually on my initial visit to India in 1972 that I first saw the 4 Raktaveli pieces. I visited the Nair Taravad, that's the ancestral home, at Cherukunu in the Kannur district, along with a mutual acquaintance, a nun from the nearby St. Martin de Porres Hospital, who was also my interpreter. On that occasion, the story that Parukuti Amma, the old lady at the Nair Tharavad in Kerala, told me seemed ludicrous and far-fetched, but the faulty perception was partially mine, as I had never really believed the story that the Apostle St. Paul visited as far east as India, or even that Christians actually existed in India as early as the 1st century AD. Thanks to my ignorance, at first it sounded nonsensical, because I reasoned that neither the Romans nor, for that matter, any substantial community even within Judea had converted to Christianity as early as that. They would probably still be recovering from the shock of the crucifixion. To be told that a contemporary of Christ himself had established many churches in Kerala about 1,950 years ago was local yarn or legend. As many Europeans still do, I believed the propagation and spread of Christianity in India was a result of much more recent colonization of India by Europeans, such as the English, French, Dutch, and Portuguese, despite the nun from the local mission hospital making several attempts to convince me that I was wrong. In fact, on that visit to Parukuti's ancestral household, I had not even bothered to photograph measure or weigh these venerable coins when they were shown to me. Today I know for certain that they belong to the original 30 pieces of silver that betrayed Jesus. Whatever happened to the remaining 26, these are perhaps the most important ancient Christian relics to surface in recent times, and I had not even paid due attention to them. But by the year 1976, sitting in my room in Munich, I had begun to give more serious thought to what exactly I had been shown at Paracuti's ancestral home 4 years ago. Portuguese attempts to take the coins? My curiosity reached a high point, for I had just returned from Lisbon, where I had the opportunity to go through a private collection of very old manuscripts dated between 1690 AD and 1860 AD, recovered or rescued from Dammam and Goa, India, in 1961 by Manuel Antonio Vassallo e Silva. They contain details of several attempts by the Portuguese to acquire 4 silver coins, referred to variously as moedas de prata santos, moedas de Thomas, reliquias de Thomas, and moedas sangrentos, supposedly in the possession of some Hindu family in Malabar. There were details of arrests made, interrogations carried out, and even summary executions. It is also mentioned in the Padroado Real, indicating even the Pope of that time was aware of the existence of these coins. Now, there was no doubt in my mind as to what the Portuguese were looking for. I longed to return to Kerala once again and visit Cherukunu, returning to India. Thus, in the winter of 1976, I landed at Bombay into a very different India from my last visit. It was as if some of Germany's afflictions had followed me there. The whole country was in some sort of curfew, and my passport and travel papers were being scrutinized more often and in greater detail. The police were present in most places. I remember being warned by well-wishers not to be critical of the government or be seen carrying more cash than a regular tourist. A large number of the country's opposition, as well as press reporters and foreigners, were languishing in jails. The vibrant democracy I had known of that country seemed to have gone bananas. Apollonius of Tyana, similarities to Jesus. However, I had no intention of abandoning my quest. In the very first week that I had of that visit, I had not only come to know the story of St. Thomas and his martyrdom in India, near Madras, but also that in the past the various denominations of Christians in Kerala made attempts to acquire the 4 coins gifted by St. Thomas to preserve them in a church as relics. I was told by some old priests of the Catholic Church that Syrian Christians or Nasrani Christians made the most vociferous claims to the coins as early as 1920s, but the issue took a backseat during the Malabar riots of 1921, and the matter was subsequently forgotten. According to my friend at the mission hospital, Malayalam's writings of that time made several mentions of St. Thomas coins. Nehru, during his prime ministership, is believed to have received a petition from a priest of Kerala to do all that he could to restore the coins to the Nasrani church. Nehru apparently ignored the petition, as his office issued no reply. On my second visit in the winter of 1976, I found myself in a different scenario at Cherukunu. The beautiful ancestral house with its koloon, the pool, teak wood pillars, and central courtyard was lying in a huge heap of rubble. The heavy brass fillings on the doors were being ripped off, the age-old timber to be sold away. The rubble was now being used to fill the back granite-lined column on the steps of which Parukutu and I had sat chatting not many years ago. Trucks arrived to carry the timber and age-old furniture away. I was aghast and remember shedding a few tears, much to the amusement of some family members and workers scattered around the compound. A foreigner is hardly ever seen in these parts, and this time my friend, the nun from the mission hospital, could not accompany me either. I stood alone at the edge of the compound at the concrete gateway of the house the locals call the Koni, having made it through the pathways in the paddy fields below and terrified at the thought of encountering a snake. A smaller house of common contemporary architecture had been built nearby, through the doorway of which Parakutty emerged. She smiled despite looking much older than her 70-odd years and very weary. She was obviously ailing and had only risen from her bed on hearing of my arrival. She offered me some prasadam from the Someswari temple, a languishing ancient Hindu shrine located barely a minute's walk away outside the Theravada compound. Seeing Parakutty again, I was then met by a nephew of Parakutty who was a government revenue officer of some seniority in the district collector's office. He explained in slow and halting English how difficult it was today to maintain a manor house of that size in this day and age, he said, and how and why everybody in the family was now living scattered elsewhere, mostly outside the state of Kerala, prompting him to make the decision on behalf of the whole family to divide the large estate into plots for their heirs of the Theravada if they ever chose to come back to the land. He also revealed that the Theravada house they were now demolishing, and which was at the foot of the gradually rising hill, was a rebuilt one, the original one having been removed to allow the railway line to pass through in the early 1900s. I followed Parakutty into her new house, recently built on what was given to her as her share of the Theravada land within the large compound. Over coffee, cakes, and banana chips, I broached my pet topic again with her. The toy and the enthusiasm of my earlier encounter with her were missing, and it took some effort to keep her on the topic. She complained about the power cuts and the disinterest of most family members to visit the Theravada even once in a few years, which had resulted in the decision to demolish the Theravada. She vaguely remembered the Theravada in all its splendor when she was a little child, of lawyers, judges, and soldiers in her family, of temple elephants and palanquins, festivals and feasts, and especially of the family's contribution to the nearby Annapurneshwari temple, as well as the austerities endured during the country's freedom struggle of 1947. She remembered as a child learning the spinning of cotton on the chakra from the elders as one of Mahatma Gandhi's efforts at self-sustenance. Today our clothes come from Dubai, she laughed. So on my request, and on the table was cleared, when the table was cleared, the old lady produced a little box with the coins. My excitement this time was irrepressible. I washed my hands before handling them, and took pictures of each as best as I could. Using a small weighing scale I carried for the purpose, I weighed each piece of silver. I even measured the approximate diameter of each coin. Satisfied that at last I had enough data, I returned the coins to the old lady. She then began to narrate 3 or 4 instances when the nun from the mission hospital brought Christian patients with acute and chronic ailments furtively to the Theravada to pray before the coins, placing their hands over the little box that contained them. The nun claimed the patients experienced quick and complete recovery from their afflictions. I listened to the familiar miracle stories related to Christian relics the world over, wondering what to make of it. Request to not report St. Thomas silver coins. All went well up to that point in time. However, from that moment onwards, other relatives who had been curiously listening to our conversation began addressing Parakutty in Malayalam, after which the mood in the room turned altogether sober. Parakutty suddenly pleaded with me not to write or publish an article regarding the coins, as the country was under martial law of some kind. She tried to explain to me that any controversy related to the coins in the newspapers may be met with unwarranted police inquiry. something her relatives feared. Though I could not see any crime committed or law broken by the mere possession of some family heirloom, I promised her I would publish nothing. As I was returning to Bombay, I also remember that year the newspapers in Kerala was agog with news of some human rights issue surrounding police brutality referred to as Raja case. Perhaps there was this unreasonable and morbid fear of what the police might be capable of in the psyche of Malayali in those days. And I remember Parakuti's last words to me: India is more secular, tolerant, and careless today, Paul Amol. The communist government in Kerala does not care for relics. You have witnessed that my very family doesn't care for their own Theravada. The bright days of Dubai and Saudi are today's reality. Everyone wants to go there. New television sets, cars, and electronic goods are the only kind of attraction. Thondachan's shrine lies dilapidated somewhere in the paddy fields. We have stopped contributing to the annual puja years ago, as though it was some superstitious belief of the lower caste. Since the demolition started, hundreds of valuable antiques from the Theravada have been sold for a song. The day is not far when these coins will also be forgotten when I am gone, Mole. Her speech was often interspersed with Mole, an endearing local expression to mean little one or daughter. Quite some years would pass before I traveled to Israel in the mid-1990s and was introduced to an expert in Middle Eastern, especially biblical numismatics. His name was Yaakov Meshorer, an acclaimed scholar in the field. He examined the enlarged photographs of the four Rakta Veli pieces closely along with the weights and diameters I recorded. Interestingly, remarkably well preserved, Meshorer remarked. The lack of adequate patina for a set of coins as ancient as these would have bothered me, but considering they remained uncirculated and did not change hands, could be partly the reason for their mint condition. But these four coins fall in the category of what I call Jerusalem fakes, he said. Meaning they are not the real thing, I inquired, to which Meshorer explained, I do not wish to comment on whether these four coins belong to the 30 pieces mentioned in the Judas story as told in the New Testament, but my belief is that it was most likely a shekel of Tyre that Jesus and Peter paid as a temple tax. Half shekel each was mentioned in Matthew 17:27, and therefore it's possible that the same shekels of Tyre were the coins that the priests of the temple paid to Judas as mentioned in Matthew 26:15. There were two kinds of shekels from Tyre in use in Judea at the time, one that had the alphabets KP inscribed on them belonging to the era 18 BC to 66 AD, and one without. When Tyre discontinued minting these coins in 19 BC, the Jewish authorities continued minting them in Jerusalem because they were the only coins acceptable for tax payments, perhaps due to the high percentage of Tyrian silver in these coins. The artistic style deteriorated, however, with every new lot minted over the decades, but their overall look and their weight in terms of the silver content was enough to pass them off as a shekel of Tyre. These temple fakes are many, varying greatly in design accuracy as various casts and molds were used by the priests over the time. Many perhaps remain to be discovered yet. Your four coins belong to this category. It may have been 30 of these Jerusalem fakes that Judas received from the priests. The four coins you have here definitely belong to a category of the shekels of Tyre that exist in the time of Jesus, he said. And the information from a scholar of eminence was enough for me. I knew for certain the coins were true relics from St. Thomas. It was anyway inconceivable to me that a semi-literate old Hindu woman would make up such a fantastic story. The old Portuguese records in themselves were quite convincing to the extent that the Portuguese inquisitors had definite intelligence and information that the coins had survived till the 16th and 17th century and were in the possession of the Cambian Valapil Nair family. The only question that now remained unanswered in my mind was how St. Thomas came to possess the possession of the 30 shekels of Tyre. That was a matter of secret transaction between the temple priests and Judas. Now, as if by act of destiny, translation of text called the Gospel of Judas discovered in Egypt began emerging from 2001 and even published in early 2006 by National Geographic Society. The Gospel of Judas is a Gnostic gospel whose content consists of conversations between Judas Iscariot and Jesus, in contrast to the canonical Gospels, which paint Judas as a betrayer of Christ who delivered him up to the authorities for crucifixion in exchange for money. The Gospel of Judas portrays Judas' action as done in obedience to instructions given by Christ. And even in the canonical Gospels, there is evidence to believe Jesus knew exactly who would betray him, when and how it would be done, etc. Obviously, there was more to the events of 2,000 years ago than was recorded by Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. Of the hundreds of Gospels written in the centuries following Christ, only 4 have been declared acceptable or canonical. There is also a long list of lost Gospels, which have been well known to have existed and written earlier than the canonical Gospels, perhaps immediately after the crucifixion, but which disappeared or have been destroyed at various times in history on the whims of some monarchs, non-Christians, or Catholic Church itself. I'm certain the truth will finally emerge on how these 30 pieces of silver came into Jesus's and St. Thomas's possession. Today, I'm nearly 80 years old and quite feeble myself. My last visit to India was in 2004, staying long enough to see the Taj Mahal and visit Rajasthan, and I returned to Germany in 2005. It was another India all over again for me. Cars of every description piled the roads, and the roads themselves were lined with malls, supermarkets, and stores selling exclusive international brands. People looked wealthy and fashionable. Consumerism was certainly at a high. It was mid-October when I landed in Bangalore, this time having decided to take the road to reach Kerala, and there was some excitement on the highway when news broke that some famous bandit had been done away with by the police. I remember wondering what a strange country I was in. I had just left behind a city whose streets were lined with blue-chip corporates and malls with bowling alleys and fine dining restaurants. In a matter of less than a couple of hours, I was on a highway where a man who lived his life as a forest brigand and elephant poacher had just lost his life. My dear Parakuti Amma was long dead, and the compound in which the Taravat stood was overgrown with weeds. Some new houses in the vicinity were perhaps owned by her relatives, but it appeared pointless trying to communicate with them. My friend the nun at the mission hospital has also been transferred elsewhere. I had come along and left Cherukunu in a matter of hours without meeting anyone except some hospital staff who barely knew me. I felt free to now talk about the coins, perhaps even write about them. This is what I did when I returned to Munich. Justin, a contact in India, later wrote to me to tell me that the story was circulating among Indian Christians, but most seemed unsure about its authenticity. Very few even felt the need to investigate anything more into the matter. Parakuti was right. Nobody quite cared. Instead, a few months later, a relative Parakuti called me on my mobile phone all the way through to Munich in a rather foul mood, wanting an explanation as to why I had broken my promise. I told him that it was time the world got to know about a very important relic lying in obscure hands, and that anyway the person to whom I had made the promise was long dead. Apart from that, I had published the article only in Germany. I felt I had done my bit for God and man. The caller began to use abusive language. I listened to some of his offensive expletives and decided I had had enough of this exploit in my life. I am aging too and not in good health lately. I have delved into this story long enough. I have failed to understand the irrational fear of publicity some members of the family have. Apart from the fact that this event in the Bible particularly that of the exchange of these silver pieces between Judas and the temple priests, was a pivotal episode for the very start of Christianity. These relics also prove that the Apostle St. Thomas had indeed visited India. The coins may never be revealed to anyone for another generation by this Hindu family, but I, once and for all, desired to set the record straight and let the matter rest for good in my life. Thus, this is my story in all its necessary detail, says Paula Gruber. This is on Historic Mysteries. Amazing, isn't it? Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. My Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.